And my portion of the lagoon extends from about Rockledge down through all of Indian River County. What I'm talking about today, though, will apply to all of the lagoon. I know that we do have very distinctive issues in our portions of the lagoon. And so we're going to be talking generally about the central part of the lagoon, but on your note cards, please feel free to ask any questions. So today we're going to be talking about, I'm already not going. So today we're not just talking about what's ailing the lagoon, but my favorite part is finding solutions to bring the lagoon back to health. So it's not just what's wrong and how did we get here, it's also what can we do about that. So the Indian River Lagoon is one of the 28 lagoons of national significance as deemed by the EPA. And so you can see where those other national estuaries are. And when the EPA designated the Indian River Lagoon as an estuary of national significance, there needed to be a place to host that program, the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. So what in the world is the Indian River Lagoon? Many of us still refer to it as the river. I'm hoping to convince you that maybe you can use a different word. It's long and narrow. It's 156 miles long. Technically extends a little bit into Palm Beach County, which technically means 6 counties, but for our purposes, we really consider 5 of the counties. So it is long and narrow like a river. It's brackish water, meaning a mixture of salt and fresh. The fresh water coming from natural inputs like Crane Creek, Turkey Creek, and of course, fresh water coming from unnatural inputs. That would be all of the ditches and canals that drain into the lagoon. And the salt water coming from the inlets. Our lagoon is a type of estuary. An estuary is a place where salt and fresh water mix. And our estuary is further defined as a lagoon because of the presence of a barrier island. So for example, Tampa Bay is also an estuary, but there is no barrier island system. And so therefore that's a bay and not a lagoon. It's primarily a wind-driven system. So if you are outside of about 7 miles or so in either direction of the inlets, tidal influence can be pretty negligible. Of course, king tide, spring tide, all bets are off, and you'll definitely notice a tidal influence throughout most of the lagoon. But for the most part, this really is a wind-driven system, not a tidal-driven system. And it doesn't have a flow like a river. A river always flows in the same direction in the northern hemisphere. Rivers mostly flow south, although, Florida's so darn flat that we tend to forget the rule of gravity. And the St. Johns River actually flows north for 310 miles, but that's a totally different subject. And all of this evidence together, I hope will convince you that this truly is a lagoon. We inherited the name Rio Dice, River of the Ice Indians, because that's what the Spaniards named it. This body of water didn't name itself. And the big reason I would love for you to not think about this as a river is a river eventually has a chance to flush itself out at some point. Might take a while, but the lagoon rarely gets a chance to completely flush itself out. Hurricanes are one exception. I know as humans, we think about hurricanes as being bad things because they are destructive. However, in nature, hurricanes just kind of are. They're not bad, they're not good, they just do what they do. And when we have really big tidal surges because of a hurricane, like in 2004, for example, that actually gave the lagoon an opportunity to flush itself out. And we saw some improved health statistics right after the 2004 hurricanes because they weren't big rain events. They were big tidal surge events. And so because we have no flushing over time, our legacy load builds up. So all of the things that we've been doing to the lagoon for all the years eventually is what kind of we're dealing with now, and that's being called the legacy load. So if I can't convince you because manatees are cute and it's fun to go fishing and who doesn't like to go kayaking, please also know that the Indian River Lagoon is one of our economic drivers for this area. There was an amazing study done in about 2016 that will soon be updated, but it did find that the lagoon is worth about $7.64 billion a year. And what we really excites me, it also found that for every dollar that we commit to restoring the lagoon back to a healthy system, we will get a return of 33 times. I don't know where else you can get that kind of investment, that much bang for your buck, but that return on investment to me is very exciting. And so I like to talk to people's wallets first, because a lot of people, that's a good way to chat with them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get into what happened. What was it that created that legacy load, and why did we get pushed over the edge in about 2011 or so? And this is highly oversimplified for the purposes of a presentation. And if you have any questions, write them on your card and we'll go over. So we were experiencing pre-2010 or so a multi-year drought, coupled with those harsh winters. If you lived here in the winters, the winter that ended 2009, began 2010, and then again at the end of 2010, we experienced record-breaking low temperatures, 22 degrees in some parts of Florida for multiple nights in a row. That's odd. And those record cold ambient temperatures, of course, had an effect on the water as well. In some parts of the lagoon dropped to 41 degrees. That's just crazy. If you remember the cold stranding event we had with all of the sea turtles, it's because they couldn't tolerate those low water temperatures. Again, these things aren't good or bad just in and of themselves in nature. It's just things that happen. But it did kind of set the stage for what happens next. So with a drought, salinity in the lagoon increased dramatically. Some parts of the lagoon were 45 parts per thousand. The ocean is only 35 parts per thousand, meaning some parts of the lagoon actually became saltier than the ocean. And in the summer, especially if we have a hot, dry summer, this can happen, but usually, as has been happening with our weather recently, as soon as it gets to that 92 degrees, a thunderstorm comes through and helps to dilute that high salinity. But because we were in that drought, it wasn't happening. And so these consecutively harsh winters killed all the tropical stuff. Luckily, we saved a lot of the sea turtles, but all those fish, you probably remember, just tons and tons of fish, tons of organic matter, plant material, all of those things died and sank to the bottom and created a negative situation for the roots and rhizomes of seagrass, because it created extremely low oxygen conditions at the benthos on the bottom. At the same time, you know that algae that might get referred to as the tumbleweed of the lagoon? It's that reddish brown stuff that just kind of rolls around in the lagoon. That would normally act as a nutrient absorber, kind of like a shock absorber, but it also died. So at a time when we had all this organic matter being released into the lagoon, we lost one of our natural shock absorbers. Everybody with me so far? Okay. All right. So this dramatic salinity created the stage for a phytoplankton, a plant plankton, to be able to thrive. It's just something that happens to do really well in high salinity conditions. So we have this excessive nutrients, we have toxic hydrogen sulfide on the bottom, and we have hypersaline conditions. And all of that set the stage for what we did call, and we do still call it the super bloom. Little did we know things could get even bigger than this, but we called it the super bloom. And during that super bloom, we lost about a 45% decline in our seagrasses. But nature doesn't stand still. So that then led to yet another situation. So that phytoplankton greedily gobbled up all of the available nutrients in the water until it could gobble no more, and it died, allowing the brown algae, the Oreoumbra lagunensis, to thrive in these low nutrient conditions. So this guy was doing great until it wasn't. And now this guy, the brown algae, took over. And this is where parts of the lagoon, especially up here in north, looked like chocolate milk. During the first super bloom, it looked a little bit like Gatorade right about to the Sebastian Inlet. And then it looked like chocolate milk. Neither one of those conditions we want to see in the lagoon. And so this brown tide shaded out even more seagrasses, creating a loss of even more seagrasses, totaling over 47,000 acres loss of seagrass. And what we know from a very similar situation in Texas, in Laguna Madre, is that this could take 2 decades to recover from. We have to be in this for the long haul. And if you thought what I said was complicated, look what the scientists are checking out. It's okay to laugh. I insert this slide for pure comedic relief. However, it does remind me of one of my favorite quotes. Not only are ecologies more complex than we imagine, they are more complex than we can imagine. So even this extremely complicated diagram probably is missing several components of what was really going on in nature, meaning it's complicated. So this is just, you've probably seen this same chart in lots of places. This is produced by St. John's River Water Management District. We're always checking out this graph just to show you that for a while, seagrasses were actually improving. And like I said, those 04 hurricanes may have even helped seagrasses because they helped flush out the system. And in 2007 or so, we did have a record level of seagrass coverage in the Indian River Lagoon. And we compare that to 1943. And it's not that we were out there monitoring seagrasses and mapping seagrasses in 1943, but I'm sure many of you know what we were doing in 1943, World War II. And with World War II, we had several naval air stations in the area, and they were testing out a brand new technology, aerial photography. And so we can look back at those 1943 maps and get somewhat of a baseline for how seagrasses were doing in 1943. But guess what? We had already started making changes to the land that would have impacted the lagoon even as early as 1943, even before that. So the problem is this goal that we have set at 1943, it's a shifting baseline. It's like if you get to this amazing breakfast buffet, but you don't arrive until 11 a.m., looks great, but what would have happened if you had arrived at 9 a.m.? There would have been even more. And so we don't know what seagrasses looked like for sure before 1943. And so that's kind of what we use as a healthy scenario is when our seagrasses are at least that 1943 level, we know that we have a healthy system. Well, go to the far right end of this graph and you see we are nowhere close to what we had in 1943. And so seagrass is such a small plant. What is the big deal about seagrass? Why do we use seagrass to tell us about the health of the lagoon? Well, we only have 7 species of seagrass in Florida, and you can find all 7 in the lagoon. They are considered a barometer or an indicator species, meaning they indicate to us what's going on in the lagoon. They are a very productive ecosystem. They increase biodiversity. They are a nursery for marine life. They are parts of the food web. They provide shelter for little cute things like, seahorses and all these things that it's fun to even find that live in the lagoon. They provide lagoon bottom stabilization, so not just their roots, but more their rhizomes. So much like if you do have St. Augustine in your yard, you know how those rhizomes grow out, seagrass grows in the same manner. And those rhizomes really stabilize the benthos, the bottom of the lagoon. It's a plant, so it provides oxygen, right? Just like we and things that live in the lagoon, animals still need oxygen. They just get their oxygen in a different manner than we, right? They use gills, we use lungs, but we all breathe the same stuff, oxygen. And what's really interesting, studies have shown that where we have both seagrasses and mangroves, we actually have better shoreline protection than if it were just mangroves. And this is kind of blows my mind because mangroves look so substantial and so massive. You would think that mangroves alone would be enough to protect a shoreline. But we know that it's the seagrass and mangroves together that really create that winning combination. And they also improve water clarity. So those blades of grass, when they're tall and healthy, they actually help to settle out suspended sediment in the lagoon. So everything that I've talked about seems, so complex, and everyone wants one smoking gun. They want to know what is the problem, and everybody wants a silver bullet, the solution. And I hope that you have already heard by now, there isn't a smoking gun and there isn't a silver bullet. It's death by 1,000 cuts type of situation. And so we're doing our best to take care of all those cuts And we do that with a system of triage. And in the meantime, we just know that seagrass can't recover on its own. And it's not just the seagrass. We've had unusual mortality events with all kinds of animals, and everything that we consider to be iconic about the lagoon has suffered from one, our legacy load, and then two, we got pushed over the edge by those strange set of circumstances. And so ever since that tipping point, repeatedly, year after year, we have different kinds of problems that we hadn't dealt with previously, whether that's a wildlife mortality event or different kinds of blooms, and sometimes blooms lead to fish kills. And we are just having this continual boom and bust of different species of algae in our system. Right now, our system is considered an algae-dominated system, not a seagrass-dominated system. So the more people that we get, the more pollution we have, and the more muck that gets built up on the bottom, which is another problem in the lagoon. And muck is considered both, there are organic components and there are inorganic components of muck. And as muck continues to degrade, you may have heard the term muck flux. It's very challenging to say. And muck flux means that as it starts to degrade, it too becomes yet another source of excess nutrients in our system. Excess nutrients is what fuels the algae blooms. And what's really interesting, this is a photo from Dr. Treffery's office, and you can see what the bottom of the lagoon once looks like pre-1950. And then it kind of washes out a little bit on this presentation. Maybe the Zoom folks can see it a little better, but all of those subsequent decades, the muck doesn't just get thicker, it gets darker. And so you hear a lot of those comparisons, bathtub, gin, clear water with a sandy bottom. That's what the old timers talk about, something that I've never seen. That core sample kind of proves what people are saying. But of course, we have growth. It's Florida. We have, look how many of the top 10 growing cities in America are actually in Florida. And take a look at this map. We're going to change over time from 2010 to projected in 2030 to projections of 2050. And take a look at the lagoon, take a look at the coast. That's where everybody wants to be. And so anytime we have more people not doing the right things, we're going to have more problems. But there is a plan. In fact, there are multiple plans, but the Indian River Lagoon has a plan. We have our comprehensive conservation and management plan. We're working on an update real soon. It's a long process. The first plan of the Indian River Lagoon Council was adopted in 2019. And so we continue to try and involve as many stakeholders, scientists, business owners, fishing guides, homeowners that just like to recreate on the lagoon, anyone and everyone who has a say about the lagoon, we want to include those folks. And I encourage you, there are some of our annual reports in the back if you want to pick one of those up, or if you'd rather just go online and save paper, feel free to do that as well. But not only is there a plan, but there is a plan with a triage system. So we have identified critical injuries to the lagoon, serious injuries, and there's some other things that we don't quite have a full grasp on. Remember that very complicated diagram? We don't understand everything all at once. We're continually learning. But we do know that we need to address these issues. And so the Indian River Lagoon Council does fund local cost share programs in these categories. And this is how much funding the council has put out there since 2015, funding by county for lagoon-related projects. This is impossible to see. So this is, I would encourage you to either, again, take a look at that annual report, just go online. And Kathy did this amazing breakdown. She's our deputy director, but She listed all of our projects over the past 2 fiscal years and then broke them down with a map. So some of them are very specific projects that are just for one area, and some of them address multiple places in the lagoon simultaneously. But when you hear that phrase that is starting to grate with me, how come no one's doing nothing? Please know, everyone is doing everything that they possibly can right now. We understand how imperative restoring the health of the lagoon is, and there is so much going on right now. One of the things that we're particularly proud of right now is our lagoon-wide restoration and seagrass nursery network. And so these new seagrass nurseries are either online and already functioning or starting to function. We're very excited about this. We're excited about learning more about how to plant seagrass in the lagoon. We can't plant our way out of this problem. You cannot just go in the lagoon and just start plopping in plugs of seagrass. That is not going to work because our water quality probably isn't there. Maybe in some places the benthos quality isn't there that would be supportive to seagrass, roots and rhizomes. We need to learn about how do we do this? Do we plant with multiple species? Do we plant a single species of seagrass? There's so much to learn, and the seagrass nursery network is going to help figure out some of those problems, or some of those questions. But just keep in mind that, remember, there's no silver bullet. So simply planting seagrass in the lagoon is not going to get us back to those 1943 levels of seagrass in the lagoon. And so most of you are probably from Brevard County and are probably very familiar with the Save Our Indian River Lagoon plan. It is the additional sales tax that you voters voted to assess to yourselves. The amazing thing is it's going to, I think this number might even be a little bit higher now, but at least $543 million from the soil tax going straight to Indian River Lagoon projects. And a really cool thing, the tourists are actually funding a really nice chunk of that, maybe about 30% of that money is being covered by tourism. So that's amazing. The lagoon is a driver in the tourism industry. And so the healthier that our lagoon is, the more tourists want to come and play in our lagoon and our backyards. And so this huge list of projects in Brevard County only will be removing lots of excess nitrogen, not quite as much excess phosphorus. It is more challenging to remove phosphorus, but it's happening. In Indian River County just today, I was actually watching the Indian River County Commission meeting on YouTube in my car on the way up here. That was a first for me. I'm excited to say that the Indian River County will soon have their Indian River Lagoon plan as well. It's not like Indian River County hasn't been doing things for the lagoon. So recently, voters approved taxes to fund land acquisitions and for all kinds of water quality related projects and flooding projects. So things are happening in other counties too. Like I said, I'm kind of focusing on Brevard since that's where we are today. And look at this, the amazing amount of projects that our partners have done without our funding as well. This is absolutely amazing. And so this alone should appease our minds that it's just not true that no one's doing nothing. Lots of people are doing lots of things. And you can do lots of things too. So it's true that as individuals, we don't have as big of impact as a multi-million-dollar muck removal project or a multi-million-dollar canal reversal project. I mean, these projects are amazing. And while those projects are going on, we can do our part too. So you need to remember, problems in the lagoon are all based on the land. So we reduce, reuse, recycle. We don't litter. We keep grass clippings out of streets, ditches, and canals. This is not an easy thing. It does have an easy solution though. So when you're mowing your lawn, or if the service is mowing your lawn, just make sure that deflector shield is pointed back into the lawn and not into the lagoon or into any body of water, even if it's a stormwater pond, because all of our canals lead to the lagoon. Be sure and pick up dog waste. Probably the most disgusting statistic you'll hear today is the amount of dog feces left on lawns, streets, sidewalks, and daily. This is daily, 102 tons daily. I wonder, during COVID, we adopted a lot more dogs than we used to have. So I wonder if that number is still the same. And dog waste does have some nitrogen and some phosphorus. It also has a variety of harmful bacteria and viruses. Where does that fit into the diagram? Who knows? A lagoon-friendly lawn is definitely something that everyone who is a homeowner or a landowner can work towards, replacing sections of traditional grass with attractive Florida-friendly plants. And there is a Florida statute that does say that your homeowners association may not prohibit you from having a Florida-friendly lawn. Now, there are lots of caveats. And one of the big caveats is you still have to go through the proper procedure with your HOA. Usually that means approaching your architectural review committee and things like that with an approved plant list. So you better know what is considered Florida friendly and what is not. I know of cases where people went in, they took out all their grass and put in rocks. That's not Florida friendly. Grass would have been better than rocks because at least grass, is taking up nutrients and stopping sediment. I know another case where this gentleman took out all of his lawn and put in cacti and tried to call that Florida friendly. And in both of those cases, homeowners associations were able to sue the homeowner and they had to undo what they did. What a costly mistake. And so do a little research. Maybe you even want to hire a professional to help you so that you know definitely what is Florida friendly. But by using lagoon-friendly landscaping, we can dramatically reduce our chemical use on lawns and gardens. And if you want that highly manicured look, this picture in the far left corner, that is Florida-friendly and it's highly manicured. And I don't ever want to be responsible for maintaining that, but you can do it. My yard is kind of more in the middle. It's not totally wild and woolly, but I don't have a lot of lawn, but you can also have that compromise. We've got a little bit of wild and woolly, and you've got a little bit of the lawn as well. Over-fertilization means that all of that extra nitrogen and phosphorus going into our ditches and canals increases freshwater plant growth in our ditches and canals. And when those ditches and canals carry the water to the lagoon, those freshwater plants are going to die in the brackish water and release their nutrients. And so freshwater plants are great at taking up nutrients. And there's an amazing project in Indian River County where those freshwater, there's two projects actually, one where they're harvested and one where they kind of get screened out. And so they removed a significant amount of nitrogen and phosphorus from the water, then they get removed from the system. But if we don't remove those plants from the system and they end up in the brackish water of the lagoon, that's doing us no good. It's very inexpensive to put a pound of nitrogen on your lawn, and depending on what kind of project you're referencing, it can be really expensive to get that same pound of nitrogen out of the water. A big thing today, and there was a summer camp here, a Creation Care summer camp was taking place before you all got here. And they committed to learning more about their septic tanks, which is awesome for teenagers to do. And so I asked all of us, what do we know about our septic tanks? There are approximately 300,000 septic tanks in the 5-county region, and they leach nitrogen. We have sandy soils. And so they leach nitrogen into either into the groundwater or even just sometimes with a more surface runoff, they get nitrogen into the lagoon. So what do you know about your septic system? A lot of properties cannot yet connect to a sewer line. It's just not there yet. Maybe one day it will be, or maybe it won't. But until you have the opportunity to connect to sewer, what are you doing about your septic system? How much do you know? How old is it? Do you have it regularly inspected? Are you having it pumped out? I know this, I saw something online where a woman said, I've lived in my house for 44 years and I've never had my septic tank pumped and I've never had a problem. She just doesn't know about the problem. I'm sure it's there. So there is no way you could, unless nobody ever lived in that house, if your septic tank is that old, you need to have it inspected. Someone else had theirs inspected, their new homeowner. They found a queen-sized sheet in their septic tank. What? I mean, yeah, who knows what you might find. So definitely, if you have one, get it inspected so you know a little bit more about it. You do need to know where your outlet tee is and where your hose, the hose trap is from time to time. You want to hose off the trap from time to time. And so I have a little diagram here. If you're not yet familiar with how a septic tank works, you can see, how a traditional septic tank works. When properly designed and installed and maintained, a traditional septic tank removes about 34% of nitrogen and about 10% phosphorus, and even that might be a little high. And so these are all the things that are fine to go in a septic tank, things that make sense, obviously human waste and TP and all of the soaps and things like that. That stuff's okay. But I have a much longer list of stuff that we really need to be careful about if we have a septic tank. Some probably obvious, like paint and sand, maybe some not as obvious, like liquid fabric softener. Liquid fabric softener, it feels kind of greasy. It actually interferes with the way bacteria consume the waste in a septic tank. Even something as innocuous as doing back-to-back loads of laundry, all of that rush of water into the system can overload the system. A garbage disposal, you're just putting extra solids. If you have a septic tank and you have a garbage disposal, when you use your garbage disposal, you're just putting extra solids into your septic tank. And so think about, the things that you might be able to do. Maybe stop using your garbage disposal, or maybe even take it a step further and start composting. All of those antibacterial soaps that we got so used to using during COVID, and we all became a little bit more careful about germs, those things can actually be detrimental to septic tanks. So really examine your life. Are you living lagoon friendly? While all of those other projects are going on, do you practice the 3 R's? What type of lawn do you have, and how do you maintain it? If you have a septic tank, how much do you know about yours? Do you have a dog? Do you pick up after it? For what is the environmental crisis, if not a crisis of the way we live? The big problem is nothing more or less than the sum total of countless little everyday choices. Sooner or later, it will have to be addressed at that level in our yards and kitchens and minds. And then finally, the new plate is here. Yay. So if you have a specialty plate, or even if you don't yet have a specialty plate, you might want to consider this plate, because approximately $125,000 gets put strictly into Lagoon projects annually right now from the sale of the plate. And now that we have the new amazing plate with the even more beautiful snook, we might start bringing in more funds. So if you don't yet have a specialty plate, or you're on the fence about a specialty plate, look how amazing this new plate is. And with that, I'd like to open to any questions. I think Ken and Cara might be going around, and Steve might be going around if you have some questions. And I'll read the questions aloud because I want the folks at home on Zoom to be able to hear our questions as well. So one question, how is nitrogen removed? So when you remove muck, muck has nitrogen in it. When you remove plants, the plants have nitrogen in them. And so when you don't allow those things to decompose, you're not allowing the release of nitrogen. It's not like we have a special chemical filter put on every single ditch and canal that is filtering out nitrogen from entering in the system. Why is phosphorus more challenging? Phosphorus is a natural part of Florida. I mean, that's why we have phosphate mines in Florida. And so we're going to have a relatively higher level of phosphorus anyway in Florida's waters. And what we're finding is that phosphorus plays a bigger role in algae than we may have imagined. And so, it is not taken up as easily by plants. It's not taken up as easily as by like filter feeders and things like that. And so it becomes more challenging because as many things don't take it up as take up the nitrogen. What about controlling the use of fertilizers by adding a tax on the product? So I don't want to get too political, but we do have state legislation that prevents us from interfering with interstate commerce. And so I don't know what the likelihood of of allowing a fertilizer tax might be. I'm sorry that I don't know how to answer that question. I do know that we are not allowed to prohibit the sale of inappropriate nitrogen even during rainy season. Most counties, cities, towns do have fertilizer ordinances, and especially during the rainy season, a stricter set of guidelines are in place. But we're not allowed to go to Home Depot and say, or I shouldn't say that. We're not allowed to go to a big box store and say, hey, big box store, you're not allowed to sell this type of fertilizer during the rainy season because it doesn't meet the standards. In Indian River County, we have an amazing fertilizer enforcement officer and stormwater educator. And she has found that over the years, the big box stores actually do carry more fertilizers that are compliant with the fertilizer ordinances, but not necessarily less of the ones that aren't. Oh, number two, how are tourists paying for lagoon restoration? So that same tax, it's a sales tax. So anytime that you buy things in Brevard County only, there is a 1 cent sales tax that's being set aside, much like we have a tax for beach renourishment projects and things like that. So when the tourists come to town, if they're buying boogie boards or a stand-up paddle board or fishing bait or fishing rods or whatever the case may be, the more things that the tourists buy, the more taxes we collect, and the more taxes that we get, sales tax, the more sales tax that Brevard County gets to collect, that gets put into the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program. Great question. Oh, we got that one already. Why is there a lock at Port Canaveral? How does the lock affect the lagoon? So all of our locks and inlets are somewhat natural, but they're maintained artificially. So for example, I'm more familiar with the Sebastian Inlet. Yes, there was a natural inlet about where today's Sebastian Inlet is, but inlets, if left to their own devices, will open and close with storm activity. They would be non-navigable, so that's a different kind of issue. But inlets, even when in somewhat natural positions, tend to migrate, tend to close, tend to reopen. Barrier islands, sometimes, like this happened in North Carolina, new inlets opened up that had never been there, at least not that humans knew of anyway. New inlets have opened up. We really can't get to a place where we say, okay, fine, we're just gonna shut down all the inlets. The inlets are here and they are something that we deal with. The inlets is primarily how the salt water gets into the lagoon. And so obviously more salt water comes into the lagoon than might have naturally with our inlets. But of course, more fresh water also gets into the lagoon by our canals and ditches. So we didn't used to have all this canals and ditches going into the lagoon. It was just things like Crane Creek, Turkey Creek, the St. Sebastian River, the St. Lucie River, just more natural freshwater inputs. And so we have highly altered this system. And there's no way of truly restoring the lagoon to what it once was. However, we can restore the health of the lagoon to what it once was. And rather than having this crazy algal-dominated system where it's like a new algae of the day, takes over, we can have a somewhat more stable system in which seagrasses are the dominant vegetation, just like they used to be. That would be considered a more healthy lagoon. I've answered these questions. Anybody? Oh, I think I've got some more coming this way. Oh, those are blanks. Whew. I saw this a stack in Steve's hand and got a little, they're not blanks.
You may pick out the good ones.
Okay, we might not have time for all of these.
Yeah, don't feel like you have to.
Okay, I have a feeling they're going to be good questions. We just don't know. So what are the safe, productive water quality parameters for oysters, clams, crabs, fish, and other marine life within the Indian River Lagoon? Luckily, most of the species of animals that live in the lagoon can deal with a fluctuation between more fresh and more salt. There is that happy medium, of course, And none of the organisms in the lagoon can deal with a barrage of all fresh water very quickly or all salt water very quickly. And so the real problem is not what are the parameters of a consistency, but more what are the parameters of change. And as long as the change is slow enough, the animals can deal with that. So for example, you have freshwater releases from Lake Okeechobee. That much fresh water all at once is going to kill the oysters. And I think most animals would be considered the same. How much of a positive would stopping herbicide spraying in our water bodies be? Well, I'm not an expert on herbicides at all, but I will tell you it's a fine balance. When we spray herbicides in water bodies, we kill the plants. And now what do we do with the dead vegetation? And so what we really need to think about is, canals need to be free of vegetation in order that we don't have flooding. Canals and ditches were put in on purpose so that we could live here. The first thing we did was we had cattle here, so we drained land for cattle. Then we had citrus, so we drained land for citrus. Now we have people, and so we are draining something like 147% increase is draining into the Indian River Lagoon than would have happened naturally. And so if we don't want to experience flooding, we do have to allow water to move through those canals and ditches. And this is not an easy question to answer for sure. Maybe there's some sort of happy medium where a mechanical harvesting is part of the process as well. So for example, in Indian River County, on the main relief canal, they are essentially pulling out the freshwater plants before they even get to the Indian River Lagoon. The same thing is happening with the brand new project. We were just talking about this yesterday at Moorhen Marsh, also in Indian River County, where they're harvesting out the water lettuce. They're allowing the water lettuce to be there, uptake the nutrients, and then remove those plants altogether from the system. Where is muck being removed? So muck removal has happened in the St. Sebastian River. It's happened in Turkey Creek. I don't know today what muck removal projects are happening, but they have happened in the past. They too are challenging and expensive for sure. And you need to contain the muck. And it's a long process because it needs to be dewatered before it can go anywhere. So these are expensive projects. So how can we get municipalities to stop using herbicides and chemicals? If that's what you want to do, then you can attend your natural resource board meetings, your county commission meetings, your city council meetings. I would encourage you, though, to use the more flies with honey than vinegar approach, and know that municipalities are doing a lot already. And so if this is a top concern of yours, and I know many people are concerned with this, don't go and, start attacking them for what they aren't yet doing. Go and praise them for what they are doing. And how can we work together to make this happen? It's definitely a big education effort. Oh, this is a great question. Is there any financial assistance available for homeowners for improving or upgrading their septic tanks? So in Brevard County, yes. If you go to the Sorrel website, the Save Our Indian River Lagoon, there are financial incentives for homeowners to start either upgrading their septics, or in some cases, if the sewer line is available, getting connected. It is not cheap, that is for sure. And I think we'll start seeing even more programs. There's a brand new one also in Indian River County that's going to help homeowners get off of septic and onto sewer, well, a step system as well. So there are things out there. You will need to do research for whatever town or county that you live in, but that's part of the funding in Sorrel will go to help people get off. And if I encourage you to learn more about that option for sure. What about disposing of dog poop in bags? Then it just goes to the dump. Does that go into the lagoon? So landfills, you know, for all the problems that landfills might have, we have to have landfills. And so it is a more environmentally responsible thing to bag the dog poop and let it go to your landfill. Landfills are lined, and so it will just be there, as opposed to flushing it down your toilet, for example, because our sewer systems and our septic are not equipped to be able to handle pet wastes. Sorry, this question is a complex one. Okay, so I'll read the question as written. Is there consideration of having cities and developers move from detention of stormwater, so like a stormwater pond, no, to retention, or at least aeration or ozonation of their runoff? So whoever wrote this question, we might have to talk afterwards so that I can understand a little bit better. But I will tell you that, you know, stormwater ponds are there to do a job, and that is to clean the stormwater runoff from your neighborhood. So stormwater ponds are man-made. They are not some beautiful ecosystem that has always existed. They're there to do a job. Now, hopefully they can do it with an aesthetic that looks great for your neighborhood. So for example, I would not recommend fishing from a stormwater pond or even fishing from a ditch or a canal. You know, if you do that, you need to know that the ditch, the canal, the stormwater pond are all there to try and reduce nutrients in the first place. How are all the partners working together, and how will they come up with one overall plan? Well, because some of the problems are unique to geographic regions, it's great that counties are coming up with their own plans. And especially because many of, I can't go backwards, many of the municipalities are working with the comprehensive management plan in mind. And so many of the plans out there exist with that same set of parameters, that same kind of triage of addressing the problems of the Indian River Lagoon. And so once we all start working on the bigger problems, everything will kind of happen in concert with one another. You know, in some counties, they're not able to add an additional cent sales tax because they're already maxed out. So Brevard was awesome. They had the capability of doing that. Not every county can do that. And so every county is going to be doing different things, all helping the lagoon, just as we as individuals. So if I have a septic tank and my best friend on the other side of US 1 does not, I can't tell my best friend, hey, start learning about septic tanks. That's kind of not her issue. And so we all have to start addressing all of those little problems where we can. So as individuals, as municipalities, as counties, we're all going to have slightly unique issues, all leading to excess nutrients in the lagoon. So everything that we can do to help reduce the nutrients from even getting into the lagoon in the first place is going to be the most beneficial. It's like, it's too bad that we oftentimes go to a doctor after we're already sick. Let's try and stay as healthy as we can. And when we need to go to the doctor, we do that too. But staying healthier and the preventing of the disease in the first place is usually easier and doesn't cost quite as much money as when it's, you know, it has already manifested itself as a disease. Easier said than done, but just know that there are so many entities doing lots of great things for the lagoon. And I want you to leave here today knowing that there are things that we can all be doing to help push that recovery along. We know so much more now than Texas knew with the Laguna Madre situation. So we know so much more that we can act on to help the health of the Indian River Lagoon. Oh, we have another question still. Oh, we have lots. Okay. What volunteer, oh, I love this question. What volunteer opportunities are there to help? We have so many volunteer opportunities in the lagoon. Of course, MRC has, they have a mangrove nursery here. I know a lot of you have already been involved with that. The Brevard Zoo has the Restore Our Shores program. They're working on clams, oysters, and seagrass, kind of all simultaneously. So lots of different opportunities you can get involved with there. In fact, the summer camp that was here yesterday, they had been helping with some oyster projects at the lagoon. Oh, what happens to the muck once it gets removed? So the muck has to have a place to go. So obviously that takes a lot of land to go where it gets what they call dewatered. So where the muck will go and start drying out. And then usually that muck ends up in a containment area, perhaps even sometimes a landfill. How are recent increases in temperature in our lagoon waters impacting the health of the lagoon? So just like the ocean, as temperatures rise in the ocean and as temperatures rise in our lagoon, it adds even more stress to the animals that live there. And so when they're already living in, stressful situation with these not enough food and impaired water quality and perhaps too much fresh water or too much salt water, it's just yet another stressor that's adding to the negative health of the Indian River Lagoon. So we definitely are seeing some effects, just like we are worldwide as temperatures rise. Also, as temperatures rise, water evaporates and creates hypersaline conditions, which isn't good in the long run either for the Indian River Lagoon. So temperature definitely has a big effect. How are these projects coordinated and integrated so that the sum of the projects are impactful? Every project is progress. That's what we say at the NEP. Every project is progress. So whether or not she and I talk about we're doing lagoon-friendly landscaping in our lawns, it still helps the lagoon. So I don't have to coordinate. If I do coordinate with my neighbors, even better, but I don't necessarily have to coordinate with my neighbors in order to have an impact on the lagoon. And it's the same with the counties and St. Johns River Water Management District. They do these huge, massive, multi-million-dollar projects. So the reversing of canals, for example, that St. John's has been doing. Of course, they're working with Brevard County and with the municipalities that fall within those different canals. It's going to have an effect on those communities also. How do we learn more about the latest research and the findings regarding seagrass growth, et cetera? I know that the Restore Our Shores program will have some preliminary findings going out real soon about their seagrass restoration efforts. I think at the end of the summer, maybe. Another place to look, our website, onelagoon.org, which I don't have on the slide, that's silly. So onelagoon.org is where you can also go to find out more information. And will they be passed along to citizens anytime soon? So just like our recovery is going to take some time, it actually takes time to learn as well. One of the seagrass nurseries, they just put sand in their raceways a couple days ago. So some of the seagrass nurseries are quite young. The seagrass nursery at Harbor Branch and Florida Oceanographic, a little farther south of here, they've been up and operational. And in fact, some places are buying seagrasses already from those places to get going. So we learn all the time. That's science. We learn all the time, and we're going to keep learning. So we do have to take it upon ourselves as citizens to read the papers. I think that some of the local papers do an excellent job of covering lagoon issues. So stay posted with those things. Check out our website. We also have a newsletter. If you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, Restore Our Shores has a newsletter. Your town or your city probably has a newsletter. I've been really impressed with some of this newsletters coming from some of the cities that are giving amazing data and information. So where you live, find out what newsletters are available for you, because I think that's going to be very helpful. All right, we're right about 1 o'clock. I feel like I've been talking a mile a minute. For those of you, if you had questions on Zoom, all of those questions will be emailed to me and I'll try my best to answer them. So if you are still on Zoom and if you have some questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And for those of you who are here in person, I'm around for a little bit and would love to chat some more, especially I think there were 1 or 2 questions that I might not have understood, so I might not have explained to your liking. I'll be here to keep chatting with you. Thank you all so much for coming.